Hello and welcome to the ShowRatings.tv Pilot Roundtable, a Southgate Media Group podcast. My name is Kyle Tremblay and I'm the editor-in-chief at ShowRatings.tv, a user-driven television review website. You can rate and review all your favorite shows at www.showratings.tv, including the new series we're talking about tonight, Gotham. According to Fox's website, Gotham is the origin story of the great DC Comics supervillains and vigilantes, revealing an entirely new chapter that has never been told. Here to talk about Gotham and making her podcast debut, she's a ShowRatings.tv staff writer who is covering the show for us this season, Kate Humphrey. Welcome to the Roundtable.
Thanks so much for having me, Kyle.
All right, well, you wrote a great review of the Gotham season premiere, and you're going to be covering this season. And listeners can read that at www.showratings.tv. But on our scale of 1 to 10, you gave it a 7.0, which is exactly the rating that I would have given this pilot. Except having read your review, I think I would have given it for opposite reasons. So tell me what you liked about this pilot.
Well, what I liked most was the style. I'm a big art direction person, so I'm always looking at how accurate things look, since TV, is super visual. I think Gotham was a really good blend of things that we've seen before. I think for TV, we really got the scope of it. Unfortunately, I think with the episode itself, we didn't get a huge idea of what the actual chaos was that Penguin was alluding to, but I think that it looked really good. I also think that the way they integrate the villains into the actual storyline going through this particular pilot was really creative. Those are my two favorite aspects.
Yeah, I mean, the show looked beautiful. I felt like this is a complaint that I have of Arrow, another DC Comics show which airs on the CW, which is that it doesn't feel enough like a comic book to me. If Arrow feels a little too grounded for my liking, and one of the things I liked about this Gotham pilot is that there was just something about the way the world was presented that it's still clearly identifiable as the world, but there was just some little I don't know, like a twinkle in its eye almost, right?
Yeah, definitely the lighting, the coloring. I think it looked like it was out of a comic book. It wasn't as dark shadowed as Penny Dreadful, for instance, but it had more nuance to it. It was very rich and textured, so I think that really helped me stay involved. When the first 10 minutes, I was really trying to gain my footing and see where they were going to go with it.
I want to talk about those first 10 minutes because the opening of this episode is devoted to us watching the Wayne family get shot as the Batman origin story. What did you think about this series, which is about Commissioner Gordon, ostensibly, opening with the whole Bruce Wayne deal?
Well, I think that the entire episode reminded me of a lot of traditional police dramas that I've watched before, and I think that starting with the crime is really important. I think that was effective, but it was definitely something that didn't have a lot of impact for me, and it's probably for a lot of viewers, because we already know what's going to happen. I don't really know anybody who doesn't know Batman's origin story, so I think trying to give it the level of drama that they were giving it. I mean, I understand giving Bruce sort of the sympathetic point, but I think right after that, listening to Jim's little speech about, doing anything to help him seemed a little bit, stock in terms of the plot.
This is probably the right time to mention that I am what you would call not a comic book person. I don't see the Avengers movies. I know that that's the Marvel people. I've been educated on this, but I don't see any superhero movies. I am actually kind of opposed to superhero movies, and I don't read comic books. And so the point of that is that even I know the Batman origin story. Even I am totally familiar with the whole Bruce Wayne thing and knew his parents were going to get shot. So, of all the people, who are living under a figurative rock regarding the Batman story, even they know what's happening here. And so I felt like that was indicative of the aspects of the pilot which I didn't like. Which were okay, and the part of this pilot I liked, which I get the sense is the part of the pilot you didn't like, is that I was really into the chemistry between the lead, Ben McKenzie, playing Commissioner Gordon, or not, well, not Commissioner now, but Jim Gordon,
Yeah.
police detective, and Donald Logue, the great Donald Logue, from the late great series Terriers, playing Harvey, Detective Harvey was his name?
Yeah, Harvey
Harvey
Bullock.
Bullock. Okay, I almost got there. Um, I
Yeah.
really liked this when it became a buddy cop show between a straight-laced, sort of rising star detective and a gruff, very almost corrupt, corrupt but sort of necessarily corrupt
Yeah.
partner.
It's very classic, and it's something that we don't really get to see in that straight format anymore. There's usually some darker twist. We've gone through all the buddy cop movies, doing all the different things, pairing him with a black guy, pairing him with a dog. So it's good to get back to, the original thing. And, Bob Kane did have a hand in the story, obviously. And so that they're going to go with all that classic stuff, which, I mean, was fun, but personally is something that I was hoping the series would be a little more creative with, and that leads into my points that I made in my review about how the female characters were treated on the show. We don't have to talk about that right now, but I think that it falls along with the same sort of limitations that the show had, in my opinion, where it could have jumped off into like a totally new direction. But, maybe because it's Fox, maybe because, people want to see what they want to see, we're going to get that traditional scruffy, which, yes, Donald did a really great job. I thought that his acting was really fun, and I've never seen Ben McKenzie in anything, and I really liked him in this too. So I did like that aspect, but it just wasn't my favorite. It was something that I could have done without.
Yeah, and I totally get that. And what's interesting is I feel the same way about the opposite element of this pilot, which is that, see, to me, I agree with all the points about the show not treating its female characters in this pilot very well, and I feel like that was a function of it not having enough time to devote to them, as well as other factors which we don't have to get into.
Yeah.
But I mean, for you, I think what you're saying is that the time that could have been devoted to more interesting material was spent in this sort of traditional buddy cop Bruno Heller procedural. Like he did The Mentalist, so obviously this is a guy who's worked in the procedural world before. To me, the time that could have been spent in more interesting areas was the massive amount of time we spent, in my opinion, pandering to the comic book fans, which was introducing all these characters. Oh, there's the Riddler. Oh, there's the Penguin, who I liked and you liked. But
Yes.
I'm not. I have no issues with those performances or with those characters existing in this world, but at some point I did kind of feel like this was a show. This was like a medley where they're introducing one famous guest after another, and they come out and they play like a verse from their favorite song, and so that frustrated me about this because I felt like a lot of time was spent on that.
Yeah, lots of fan service, which some of it I appreciated when it was, well done and quick. But I really disliked, how they integrated Poison Ivy, just because I don't really know where they're going to go with that, except for things that I'm not looking forward to. And I feel like, I mean, Penguin was probably the highlight in terms of those because he had a big role in the story. And he's kind of an underrated Batman villain to begin with that we don't really see a lot, and we only saw in the one Tim Burton movie. And he was very, comical, sort of like monster movie aspects in that experience. So I'm really excited to see him develop as kind of the entrepreneur, rising star kind of person who's really just out. He's kind of like lawful evil. He has his code where he knows what's going to work for him only.
Oh. Well, now we're really speaking to the comic book fans since we're bringing in Dungeons & Dragons.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to come from that lens. I totally appreciate where you're coming from, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that, because that's who I want to talk to. This would be a horrible podcast if it was two people who didn't like comic books talking about a comic book show. So you're the perfect guest here. But, yeah, I mean, like, I think the Penguin was deployed very well in this episode because, like you said, he was part of the story. And
Mm.
this is going to be a procedural. You know, this is a network television show that's going to need to get through like 20 episodes. And so, you know, you can't really tell a coherent serialized story, at least entirely serialized story, without having these procedural elements to
Yeah.
sustain that. I don't know why they needed to rush it with the other characters. I don't know why Catwoman was involved in this. I don't know why Poison Ivy was involved. I don't know. I mean, I guess the Riddler he works at the thing, but I don't know why he was involved. Like, I would have liked to see those characters doled out a little more judiciously than just piled into this pilot, so that everyone would be like on the Universal Studios tram tour, looking at all the sites and like, oh, the Riddler. You know, it's like. Yeah, it just felt like that to me.
The Joker one was probably my
Mm-hmm.
least favorite of the male characters that were revealed too soon, because I'm not sure if that's who's going to play him. I wasn't sure. You know, with things being so quick, like you're saying, not very judicious, you're really not sure where they're going to go, and it's sort of just a fan service thing to get people interested in the pilot, where they could have used the time, like you said, developing the other main characters a little more solidly, and I think that time, you know, they developed plenty of the male characters, and I think that time could have been allotted to maybe his wife and Renee Montoya.
Yes.
I thought that was a really interesting subplot, because that is true of Renee's character in the comic books. She is an openly lesbian character who quits the force. She has a really interesting story that comes after her, which is she becomes the female The Question, which is, you know, sort of a detective superhero who doesn't have a face and, you know, goes solving crime. So she's like a really interesting character, but we didn't really get much out of her except to move the story along.
Yes, and I feel like what we're talking about with the introduction of all these characters also serves to minimize the importance of that material, because it's very hard to get excited about a sort of a scene like that. I know the scene you're talking about, where the woman Renee talks to Jim Gordon's wife. That scene feels like filler when it's sandwiched between the introduction of like the Joker and the Riddler. You know, it doesn't feel like the centerpiece of the episode, when I think that kind of stuff in this episode could have been a bigger deal, and I don't think the show.
It could be its full own episode.
Yes, I don't think the show trusted the audience to stay interested in that kind of sort of smaller scene that doesn't make everyone you know, run to Twitter and gleefully tweet that they just saw the Penguin. And that's I think I got that sense a lot in this pilot, and that's sort of what frustrated me about it. But at the same time, I mean, I'm complaining a lot. I did enjoy this hour. Like, it was enjoyable. It was extraordinarily well done. I felt like it's a lot of money's behind this show, obviously, and it just seemed like the acting was really good. The world was interesting. The visuals were top notch. I mean, there's a lot going here,
Yeah.
right?
I really appreciated the pacing. I thought they fit a lot into an hour. I was surprised. I watched it through a second time, and I was surprised at how quickly things moved through, and they really covered a lot of their bases. And even though some of the dialogue most of it was very expositional, obviously, but some of it was fit, you know, very well into the time that they had. I really appreciated that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's good now, and this show's clearly going to be a hit to some degree. I mean, it was almost guaranteed that. It's very hard to fail, which is why all these superhero movies happen in the first place, because it's very hard to fail when you have the cultural cachet of Batman. 4 or 5 seasons from now, or like 3 seasons from now, what does this show look like? Do you have any sense of like where we're going with this?
I'm really hoping that the next few seasons, if it happens, which I'm, you know, sure it will, like you said, I hope that we're going to get into more subtle dialogue and really stretching out of moments, because with a pilot, there's always, you know, they're finding their feet, first season especially. I hope that we can really delve into the characters and not throw them out as fast, and hopefully have, you know, bottle episodes that focus on flashbacks for each character, or, you know, the development of their skills, or maybe going into their personality disorders, because I think that that's a really important aspect of Batman that gets explored in the comic books a lot, a little bit in the movies, but psychology is probably the main tenet, the main interesting topic of Batman for me anyway, and how each villain can basically be categorized by a different mental quote-unquote disorder. and how that manifests in sort of a creative way, how they use it as a weapon. That's what I'm looking forward to, and I hope it becomes a little more psychological along with the procedural, because I think it's important to address the procedural elements, and Batman doesn't often get enough credit for being essentially a cop drama. Batman is a super cop. He is not a superhero. He doesn't have any powers. So I think that if they go in that direction, it could be a little more gritty and realistic in the trend of how TV shows are going, but it could also have some of that fantastical sort of comic booky fun thing that they're trying to go for also.
Yeah, the show you just described is the show I want to watch. I don't know if that's the show that Gotham will be, although I do hope it is. I mean, that psychological stuff speaks to what I think is, I said earlier something that people are probably still mad at me about, that I don't like comic book movies, but I do think there is a special kind of potential for comic books on TV, because television seasons unfold kind of the same way that like a comic book issue would, which is there are a lot of installments instead of one 2-hour block. And I feel like when you're talking about Batman essentially being a procedural, that stuff is totally lost in these giant movies where he's trying to save the world.
And the continuity's all off. I'm not going to call out Nolan too hard.
Yeah,
it's the timeline is a little bit messed up. So, and I think that they'll get into that with the show.
But when you're trying to make an event, this giant summer movie, all of the sort of nuance is lost. It's just this giant festival of everything. And I think with a TV show, when you're talking about having multiple seasons and like 100 episodes, you get a chance to get into that kind of psychological and procedural stuff that would be lost on the big screen when you're doing one movie every 2 years or whatever. And so that's what I'm excited. That's what I'm looking forward to with Gotham, and what I hope that it embraces is the idea that it doesn't need to rush, and that every episode doesn't need to be an event because we're introducing big characters or the world is in danger. We can have smaller moments that within the context of the story lead to bigger things.
Yeah, I think those were my favorite moments in this episode, actually. The little moments of, like you said, the really good acting between the characters, especially Fish Mooney and Penguin had a really good dynamic. And that character arc happened really quickly, and it seemed more like it was a Penguin origin story than any other character in the show, simply because he was the common thread running through the crime throughout this particular episode. Even though he's not necessarily the one who did it, he has a lot of agency in the episode, which I found really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I always ask this question at the end of the podcast, but it might be irrelevant in this case because I feel like everybody knows what Gotham is. But I always ask, for someone who's listening to this and hasn't watched the pilot yet, and they're thinking about watching it, what is a similar show or a show that has like a similar element that if they like that show or don't like that show, they might like Gotham?
Well, I think I'm a big fan of Teen Wolf, and I'm not saying that there are very similar shows in the, but Teen Wolf does have a detective element because every season they have a new creature and they're trying to figure out what it is and why it's attacking their town, and there is sort of a procedural element where they have to go through and, sort of Harry Potter style find all these clues. And I think that Jim Gordon is a sort of, hero character that takes it on himself, is very self-righteous. I think Teen Wolf has a very similar anchor character in Scott. I think anybody who likes something like that will probably... Yeah, I'd like to tangentially reach out to that audience because I think that that's like another big fan base, supernatural, superhero, all that stuff. I think those two could be linked together. What about you?
You said the word supernatural, and that was where I was going with it. The CW show Supernatural.
Nice.
A procedural about a duo, in that case, brothers. It's a show that I don't watch, but we did a Supernatural binge a few months back, so that's how I've seen a few episodes. But it just reminded me of that dynamic where you have two central characters. Obviously, in this one, Commissioner Gordon's a little more... I keep calling him Commissioner Gordon. Jim Gordon is a little more prominent, but at the same time, there's a lot of that dynamic where you're watching two two people investigate things. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, this obviously is, taking place in a specific universe and all of that. But yeah, if you like Batman and that genre of show, that sort of yeah, Teen Wolf, Supernatural, that whole there's a whole. I feel like people who like one of those shows are more likely to like another one. Like there's a sort of grouping of shows like that, and this I think could
Yeah,
fit into that.
I'd say Penny Dreadful might
Ooh.
also. I'm just picking shows that I like, and the reasons that I like them kind of link together. But they're just the element of mystery and sort of untapped forces. But this is more in a literal sense because it's Gotham, and we're trying to go with, because there's always the divide with Batman. There are the universes that kind of take it in that supernatural direction, where Poison Ivy sort of has plant powers, or then the other direction where she just uses science to help her out. And I think they're definitely going in the more, secular, less supernatural direction, but it's still dealing with people's strengths and weaknesses, talking about having a moral code, what you believe in, what you're willing to do, the nature of people. And so I think if you're interested in like creature features or anything like that, that's sort of a similar theme that runs through in Gotham.
It's excellent. I agree with that. And okay, final rating, Kate. Thumbs up or thumbs down on Gotham?
I would say a very slow moving thumbs up. Probably, hopefully, get a little faster and more energetic after a few episodes.
Absolutely, I co-sign that. I think I think this series has a lot going for it. I think it would be very hard for Gotham to fail. I did say
Yeah.
the same thing about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and that came quite close to failing, and from a ratings perspective, might be failing right now. But I feel like Gotham is off to a much stronger start, and
Definitely. I would definitely agree. I want to watch more episodes of this where it's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I just dropped
yeah,
it right away.
that,
So,
Gotham did something that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. didn't. I was about to end the podcast, but we can talk about this for a minute. Which is Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. never felt essential right up until like late in the season when stuff actually started happening. And for whatever reason, and I don't mean like essential to like, oh, it's tied in with the movies and all that, which is I guess what happened with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I just mean like from this Gotham episode, I felt like I should be watching this show. And I don't know if that was my sense from being on Twitter or from talking to other people, or just from some element of the show itself. But I'm like, oh, this kind of feels essential in a way. Like if I'm watching television in 2014, I probably should be watching Gotham. And I never
yeah.
ever felt that with Agents of Shield.
Well, I mean, the Avengers universe is definitely more. Currently, it's a little more detailed. People are relatively more into it. Batman is just like a little bit over, quote unquote, in terms of going on the Twitter pace of like, what people are talking about right at this second. So I think bringing Batman back into the fold is going to be nice, and people really always crave Batman. So, I think that the Avengers and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is a tiny bit more niche, honestly, because Batman is just the name Batman, and it reaches over a span of a lot of characters, a lot of potential things. So it's definitely, it's going to seem more essential.
Right, and I think that what you just said is what was behind starting with the Bruce Wayne origin story, because the thing with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is you don't start with, like, Iron Man or something, right? Like, you're not, the first shot of that series is not someone that you saw on the big screen this summer. And so this, like, starting with Batman, or the child who would become Batman, is sort of, I think, Gotham staking its claim to being like relevant in the big picture sense.
Yeah, or maybe an addition to the canon that people won't be ashamed of. Like one of the '90s movies.
Yes, exactly. Oh, George Clooney is Batman. That's my Batman, by the way. Give me that as my superhero movies. Where it's unintentionally funny. All right, Kate. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. How can people keep up with you?
Basically, you can follow me on Twitter at @TheKateHumphrey. That's my handle. I don't really use it that often, but I don't know. People can follow. I guess Facebook. I'm not sure.
Well, they can also read your stuff on ShowRunnings.tv. your
is
weekly
true.
reviews of Gotham, which I'm very excited to read.
Yes.
All right, well, that concludes this episode of the ShowRatings.tv Pilot Roundtable. We invite you to check out this and other Southgate Media Group podcasts at southgatemediagroup.com and to read about, rate, and discuss all your favorite shows at ShowRatings.tv. You could follow me on Twitter at KyleLovesTV, Kate at TheKateHumphrey, and ShowRatings at ShowRatingsTV. Until next time, this has been Kyle Tremblay. Thanks for listening.
If you would like to donate to help pay for this and other Southgate Media Group podcasts, simply go to our website, southgatemediagroup.com, and click on the donate button. It can be as little as $1 or, well, as much as you want. Help keep this fun going by supporting this and our other shows. Thanks again for listening, everyone. You're the best fans in the world.